Roan Keller was replacing a plasma regulator when the universe decided his quiet life was officially over. He was shoulder-deep in the guts of a salvaged freighter engine, covered in lubricant and quietly cursing whoever had designed this particular model with access panels that required either 3 hands or tentacles. When he heard the sound, a ship landing, engines humming with power that made his workshop's aging equipment sound like children's toys by comparison, he extracted himself from the engine bay, wiping his hands on a rag that was probably making them dirtier, and stepped outside to see what kind of trader or smuggler needed repairs badly enough to land on Ember's End. What he found instead was a ship that made every survival instinct he'd carefully suppressed over 4 years wake up and start screaming. Chirolith design, military configuration, weapon arrays that could probably vaporize his entire salvage yard without breaking a sweat. The kind of ship that didn't land on forgotten frontier worlds unless someone was about to have a very bad day. The boarding ramp extended with mechanical precision, and Roan had exactly 3 seconds to consider running before she emerged. He'd seen Chirolith before, footage from the war, propaganda reels, the occasional trader passing through. But those had been images, distant and sanitized. This was immediate, physical, and completely overwhelming. She was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with the kind of build that suggested she could probably break him in half without effort and wouldn't lose sleep over it. Her armor looked like it had been grown rather than forged, dark composite material that shifted subtly with her movements, catching the light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Her hair was pulled back in an intricate style that probably had military significance he didn't understand, revealing ears that swept back in those distinctive long curves that marked Chirolith nobility. And her eyes, molten gold, intense, and currently locked on him with an expression he couldn't read. She was, objectively, the most beautiful and most terrifying thing he'd ever seen. Roan Keller. Her voice was clear, unaccented standard, carrying the kind of authority that made answering feel mandatory. 4 years ago, you performed an extraction contract in the Verindi system, civilian cruiser caught in gravitational collapse. You extracted 3 escape pods before the ship was lost. Do you remember? Roan's brain, which had been occupied with plasma regulators and access panel complaints, took a moment to switch gears. Yeah, I remember. Why? One of those pods contained me. She stepped down the ramp, moving with fluid grace that was somehow worse than aggression. You saved my life. By the laws of my people, that creates a debt that must be honored. I am Valkyrith, Crimson Blade of the Chirolith warrior caste, and I have come to repay what is owed. Roan stared at her, at the legendary ship, at the salvage yard full of broken equipment and his workshop that smelled like machine oil and poor decisions. You're the Crimson Blade. Yes, the Crimson Blade, 3rd in line for the military throne, commander of the 7th Fleet, the person whose face is literally on recruitment posters. Yes, and you tracked me down to, what, thank me? Because honestly, a card would have been fine. Something flickered across her expression, surprise, maybe amusement. Not thanks, repayment. In Chirolith culture, saving a warrior's life creates an unbreakable bond. The debt must be honored through service until balance is achieved. I am bound to you, Roan Keller, until that debt is satisfied. Okay, several problems with that. Roan set down his rag before he did something stupid with it. First, I was paid for that extraction. It was a job. Second, I didn't know who was in those pods. I just grabbed the ones closest to my ship. Third, I don't need a warrior guardian. I fix salvage. The most dangerous thing I face is faulty wiring. Need is irrelevant. Debt is absolute. Valkyrith reached the bottom of the ramp. Up close, she was even more imposing. Not threatening exactly, but radiating the kind of competence that suggested threats generally didn't survive long enough to be problems. I have searched for you for 4 years. Tracked employment records, ship registrations, contract histories. Now that I have found you, tradition demands I remain at your side until the balance is restored. That's insane. That is honor. Before Roan could formulate a response that wouldn't sound like he was arguing with a walking weapons system, another ship descended, smaller, human configuration, bearing colonial martial insignia. It landed with less grace than Valkyrith's vessel, and outstepped Marshal Sienna Cross, looking like someone who just watched her retirement plans catch fire. "Keller," she called, striding over with the purposeful walk of someone delivering bad news. "My office now. I'm kind of in the middle of something. You're in the middle of a diplomatic incident that's about to make my life significantly worse. Office. Now." She glanced at Valkyrith. "You, stay here, don't shoot anything." "I am not in the habit of shooting randomly, Marshal." Valkyrith's tone was perfectly polite and somehow still conveyed that she could, if motivated, shoot very specifically. Cross grabbed Roan's arm and dragged him toward the Colonial Administrative Building, which was generously described as functional and accurately described as a prefab unit held together with optimism. Inside her office, she pulled up screens that made Roan's stomach sink. "Do you know who that is?" She introduced herself. "Yeah. She's not just any Kyrillith warrior. She's the Kyrillith warrior, the Crimson Blade. Her victories are studied in military academies across 3 sectors. Her face is on propaganda. She's third in line for their military throne, which means she's one assassination away from commanding the largest warrior fleet in known space." Cross pulled up more screens, intelligence reports, diplomatic briefings, threat assessments. "And she just publicly declared a life debt to you, an unknown human salvager living in the middle of nowhere. I didn't ask her to." That's not the point. The point is that every intelligence agency, every political faction, and every rival warrior is about to descend on Ember's End asking why the Crimson Blade bound herself to you. There are factions in Kyrillith society who see any close relationship with humans as weakness. Her rivals will move to eliminate you before the debt can be formally recognized, because dead debtors dissolve obligations. She's painted a target on you, Keller, and probably doesn't even realize it. She seems pretty aware of her actions, actually. Then she's using you for something. Political leverage, maybe. Protection from rivals by binding herself to human territory. Cross leaned forward. "Either way, you need to refuse the debt, publicly. Send her away before this becomes a crisis." Roan looked through the window toward his salvage yard, where Valkyrith stood with perfect military bearing beside her ship, waiting. "She spent 4 years tracking me down." Which should tell you how serious she is, and how serious the consequences will be if you don't end this now. "What happens to her if I refuse?" Cross hesitated. "According to Kyrillith tradition, shame, dishonor, possibly exile depending on how her rivals spin it. She'll have declared a debt publicly and been refused. That weakens her position significantly." Roan thought about extraction contracts, about random choices made under pressure, about pods he'd saved and pods he hadn't, about 4 years of isolation on a forgotten world, fixing things and avoiding consequences, about a warrior who'd crossed the galaxy because honor mattered more than convenience. "I need to think about it." "Keller," I said, "I need to think about it." He headed for the door. "Give me until tomorrow, I'll have an answer." He left before Cross could argue, walking back to the salvage yard, where Valkyrith waited exactly where he'd left her. She watched him approach with those intense gold eyes, and for the first time since arriving, she looked uncertain. "The Marshal explained the situation," she said, "not a question." "Yeah, she did. And she advised you to refuse the debt." "She did." Valkyrith nodded slowly. "That is, practical. Refusing would protect you from the complications my presence creates. I would understand if you chose that path." "Would you?" Roan moved closer. "Because you spent 4 years finding me. That doesn't sound like someone who'd understand being refused." Her composure cracked slightly, a flicker of something vulnerable underneath the perfect warrior exterior. I spent 4 years searching because the debt is real, because you saved my life when you had no obligation to do so, because honor demands acknowledgement. But I also understand I have disrupted your life with consequences you did not invite. If you refuse, I will accept that decision and find another way to balance the scales. Another way like what? I do not know, but I will find one. She met his eyes. I will not allow you to suffer for my honor, Roan Keller. If my presence endangers you, I will leave. Roan looked at her, this legendary warrior who could probably level cities, standing in his salvage yard offering to walk away because his safety mattered more than her tradition. And he realized Cross was right about one thing. This wasn't just about life debts or honor. This was about someone who'd spent 4 years remembering a random act of salvation and refusing to let it go unacknowledged. Come inside, he said. I want to hear the full story, why you were really there, why this matters so much. Valkyrith followed him into the workshop, and in the dimming light of embers and sunset, surrounded by salvage and broken equipment, she told him the truth. They sat in Roan's workshop. Valkyrith perched on a cargo crate with the kind of perfect posture that suggested relaxation was a foreign concept, Roan straddling a workbench chair. And for the first time since arriving, the legendary Crimson Blade looked almost human. Or Kyrillith, whatever the equivalent was. 4 years ago, she began, I was returning from a mission in Kyveran space. My unit had been tasked with preventing a civilian station from being destroyed in a territorial dispute. We failed. Her voice was flat, factual, but Roan heard the weight underneath. By the time we arrived, the station was already compromised. 1,700 civilians dead. We extracted the survivors, but it wasn't enough. It's never enough when you arrive too late. You got the survivors out, that's something. It is survival, not victory, and my commanding officers agreed. They declared the mission a failure, reassigned my unit. I was sent back through the Verendi system on a transport rotation, and I spent the entire journey calculating what I could have done differently. Where I'd failed. How 1,700 people died because I wasn't fast enough, smart enough, decisive enough. Roan remembered that feeling, had lived with it for years before he'd decided isolation was easier than constantly second-guessing every choice. That's war. Bad things happen regardless of what you do. Perhaps, but when the cruiser's gravitational drive failed and we were caught in the collapse field, I was almost grateful. I thought, maybe this is appropriate. Maybe this is balance for the lives I failed to save. She looked at him. Then someone piloted a shuttle through impossible spatial distortions, grabbed my pod plus 2 others, and extracted us before the cruiser was lost. I woke up in a human rescue facility, learned that a contractor named Roan Keller had performed the extraction, and discovered he'd vanished before anyone could thank him properly. I had another contract, didn't think to stick around for medals. You saved 93 people that day. My pod, plus a family of colonists, plus a medic who'd been transporting critical supplies. That medic went on to save hundreds more during the Outer Rim cholera outbreak. The family you saved included an engineer who designed improved atmospheric processors that are now standard on colony worlds. You created cascading consequences you never witnessed. Roan felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. I also left pods behind. Didn't have time or capacity for all of them. You saved who you could. That is not failure. That is survival under impossible conditions. Valkyrith stood, moved to the workshop window. I spent 4 years understanding that distinction, learning that perfection is impossible and survival is victory enough. I built my reputation, won my battles, rose through ranks. But I never forgot the moment someone chose to save me despite having no obligation to do so, despite not knowing who I was or whether I was worth saving. That moment changed me, made me remember that every life has value beyond military calculations and strategic assessments. And you tracked me down to say thanks. I tracked you down to acknowledge the debt. to ensure I never take survival for granted, to stand beside the person who reminded me that random acts of courage matter more than perfect strategic planning. She turned to face him. The life debt is real, but it is also my way of ensuring I never become the kind of warrior who values victory over lives. You are my reminder, Roan Keller, and I would be honored to serve as yours. Before Roan could respond, alarms blared. His workshop's aging security system lit up with alerts that probably should have been impossible. Marshal Cross's voice cut through on emergency channels, sharp with tension. Keller, we've got 3 Kyrillith warships dropping out of hyperspace. Military configuration. They're broadcasting challenges in warrior-cast code. Valkyrith, if you can hear this, they're coming for you. Valkyrith's entire demeanor shifted, relaxation vanishing, replaced by cold combat readiness. She moved to the window, assessing vectors and positions with practiced efficiency. Rivals. They have tracked me here faster than anticipated. What do they want? To challenge my claim. To eliminate you before the life debt can be formally recognized. To weaken my position before I consolidate power. She checked her weapons, elegant, deadly, far too many of them. I will face them in the traditional manner. You should seek shelter. Traditional manner meaning alone. Tradition demands individual combat for matters of honor. 3 against 1 are unfavorable odds, but acceptable. That's insane. That is how challenges work. Valkyrith headed for the door, moving with the kind of focused purpose that preceded violence. Roan grabbed his emergency comm, switching to Marshal Cross's frequency. Cross, what are our options here? Officially, none. This is Kyrillith internal politics. We don't interfere. And unofficially, I've activated the colonial defense grid, and I'm looking for excuses to use it. But Keller, this is warrior-cast business. The best thing you can do is stay inside and let Valkyrith handle it. Roan looked at Valkyrith, who was checking her armor seals with mechanical efficiency, preparing to face 3 rival warriors alone because tradition demanded it. Thought about 4 years of isolation, of avoiding conflict, of keeping his head down and fixing salvage while the universe happened around him. Thought about a warrior who'd spent 4 years tracking him down because she valued honor more than convenience. What if I don't let her handle it alone? Then you'll probably die. She's the Crimson Blade. You're a salvager. Do the math. Yeah, I've done the math. And the answer is I'm not hiding while someone faces consequences alone. He switched off the comm before Cross could respond with what was probably very sensible advice he wasn't going to follow. Valkyrith looked at him. Roan, you cannot. Can't what? Stand beside someone who crossed the galaxy for me. Watch while you face unfair odds alone. I spent 4 years avoiding exactly this kind of decision, and it turns out I'm tired of it. He grabbed a plasma cutter, not a weapon really, but it looked intimidating enough. So let's go talk to your rivals. Maybe we can reason with them. Kyrillith warriors do not reason during challenges. Then I guess we'll improvise. He headed for the door. Besides, you said we're bound by life debt now. Which means your fights are my fights, right? That is not how. Too late, I'm already involved. He looked back at her, coming. Valkyrith stared at him with an expression caught between exasperation and something that might have been the beginning of affection. You are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Definitely foolish. But I've got 4 years of isolation to make up for, so let's see where this goes. They walked out together. The legendary Crimson Blade and an obscure salvager who'd apparently just decided obscurity was overrated, to face whatever waited outside. And Roan realized that for the first time in 4 years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The rival warriors landed in formation outside Roan's salvage yard, 3 ships, each slightly different in configuration but unified in purpose. The boarding ramps extended simultaneously, and out stepped 3 Kyrillith warriors who made Valkyrith look almost approachable by comparison. The first was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with armor so heavily decorated with kill marks that Roan suspected he'd need a calculator to count them all. His ears bore ceremonial rings that probably cost more than Roan's entire salvage operation, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight and didn't plan to start now. The second was lean, faster-looking, with weapons integrated into her armor in ways that suggested she treated combat as an art form. Her eyes were pale blue, cold and assessing, and she looked at Roan the way someone might look at a particularly annoying insect. The third was older, scarred across the face and arms, with the kind of presence that suggested he'd survived things the other two were still learning about. His expression was calculating, dangerous, and entirely focused on Valkyrith. Valkyrith Crimson Blade. The scarred one spoke first, his voice carrying across the yard with formal military precision. The massive warrior, Zarkin, laughed, a sound like grinding metal. This is your claimed debtor, a human salvager covered in machine oil who probably cannot even lift a warrior's blade. This is the man who piloted through a gravitational collapse field to extract survivors when trained military personnel had already abandoned the zone. Valkyrith responded, her voice level. His courage and skill saved 93 lives, including mine. The debt is valid. The lean warrior Kelmira circled slightly, assessing. Courage is measured in combat, not contracts. You claim life debt to someone who has never proven themselves in battle. This weakens you, Valkyrith, weakens all of us who claim the warrior caste. The debt is not about strength, it is about honor. Honor is meaningless when applied to those who do not share our traditions. Zarkin switched to standard, presumably so Roan could understand. Tell me, human, do you know what obligations a life debt carries? Can you recite the litany of balances? Do you understand the Kyrillith codes of combat honor? No, Roan admitted. I don't know any of that, but I know that Valkyrith spent 4 years tracking me down because keeping her word mattered more than convenience. I know she's willing to face 3 warriors alone because her honor demands it. And I know that warriors who show up 3-on-1 to eliminate an unarmed debtor aren't operating from honor, they're operating from fear. The salvage yard went very quiet. Kelmira stopped circling. Torvin's expression darkened. Zarkin looked at Roan the way someone might look at prey that had just said something unexpectedly interesting. Fear. Zarkin's voice dropped to something dangerous. Explain. You're afraid that Valkyrith acknowledging a human's value might make others question the rigid hierarchies you've built your power on. You're afraid that if a legendary warrior can bind herself to someone beneath her station, maybe those stations aren't as fixed as you want everyone to believe. You're not here to verify a life debt. You're here to eliminate evidence that your system isn't as absolute as you claim. Marshal Cross's voice suddenly boomed across the yard, amplified by the Colonial Defense System's loudspeakers. Attention, Kyrillith warriors. You are on human colonial territory. Any act of violence against colonial residents will be treated as an act of war. The defense grid is active and currently targeting all 3 of your vessels. You are welcome to conduct your challenge according to your traditions, but you will do so under human observation and following human rules of engagement. Or you can leave. Now. Zarkin's hand moved toward his weapon. Kelmira tensed. Torvin, the scarred veteran, held up a hand to stop them. He studied Roan with an expression that might have been respect or might have been calculation, hard to tell with alien facial structures. Then Valkyrith did something Roan didn't expect. She removed one of her ceremonial blades, elegant, deadly, inscribed with characters he couldn't read, and turned to face him. Roan Keller. Her voice carried the weight of ritual, formal and deliberate. You have stood beside me when you could have sought shelter. You have spoken truth when silence would have been safer. You have demonstrated courage that transcends species and tradition. She held the blade horizontally between them, both hands supporting it like an offering. In Kyrillith culture, a warrior offering their blade to another is an acknowledgement of equality, of partnership, of shared fate. By accepting this blade, you declare yourself my equal in the eyes of my people. The life debt becomes not obligation, but mutual bond. We face all consequences together, as partners, until death or honor releases us. The three rival warriors went absolutely still. Even Zarkin looked surprised. Valkyrith, Torvin said carefully, do you understand what you are offering? Blade bonding is permanent, unbreakable. It elevates this human to warrior caste status in our law. Your enemies become his. His choices affect your honor. Your rivals will have legal grounds to challenge him directly. I understand completely. Valkyrith didn't take her eyes off Roan, and I offer it freely. Roan looked at the blade, beautiful, lethal, covered in inscriptions that probably detailed battles and victories he'd never understand. Looked at Valkyrith, whose perfect warrior composure had cracked enough to show hope and uncertainty, and something that looked like genuine trust. Looked at the three rival warriors who represented everything wrong with systems that valued hierarchy over humanity. He thought about 4 years of isolation, of fixing broken things while avoiding broken people, of extraction contracts made under pressure, random choices that saved some lives and not others, guilt that followed him to the edge of known space. He thought about Marshall Cross's sensible advice to refuse everything and return to obscurity. About the target he was painting on himself by accepting this blade. And he thought about Valkyrith spending 4 years tracking him down because one moment of random courage had mattered enough to remember. He took the blade. The moment his hands closed around it, something shifted in the air. The three rival warriors saw it, recognized the significance, and Roan watched Zarkin's expression move from anger to cold calculation. Torvin spoke in Kyrillith, rapid, formal, what sounded like legal pronouncements. Valkyrith responded in kind, her voice steady and absolute. Then she switched to standard for Roan's benefit. The blade bond is acknowledged, witnessed by 3 warrior caste challengers and human colonial authority. The life debt is now mutual partnership. Torvin has invoked the 60-day consideration. Tradition allows rival warriors time to assess new bonds before challenges can be formally issued. We have 60 days before they can move against us directly. And after 60 days, if they still wish to challenge our bond, they can do so according to proper combat protocols. But the bond itself is now protected by law. They cannot simply eliminate you to dissolve it. They must challenge both of us formally with witnesses. Zarkin stepped forward, his massive frame somehow even more intimidating up close. 60 days, Valkyrith. Use them to teach your human what it means to stand beside a warrior, because when that time expires, we will test whether this bond is genuine or simply political theater. He looked at Roan. And human, pray you prove worthy of the blade you now carry, because if you dishonor it, even Valkyrith's protection will not save you from the consequences. I'll try to contain my terror, Roan said, which was probably not the diplomatic response but felt appropriate given the circumstances. Kelmira made a sound that might have been amusement. He has courage at least, foolish courage, but courage nonetheless. She looked at Valkyrith. 60 days, we will be watching. All 3 warriors returned to their ships. Engines powered up with barely contained violence, and then they were gone, ascending through Ember's End's atmosphere in perfect formation, leaving Roan standing in his salvage yard holding a ceremonial blade and wondering what exactly he'd just committed to. Marshall Cross appeared, moving fast across the yard, her expression somewhere between impressed and furious. Keller, do you have any idea what you just did? Accepted a blade from a legendary warrior and apparently became her equal in the eyes of Kyrillith law. Roan looked at the weapon in his hands. Also possibly destroyed my quiet life forever. You became the first human to formally acknowledge a Kyrillith warrior blade bond. Your action will be studied by xenoanthropologists, debated by politicians, and probably used as either propaganda or evidence of cultural contamination depending on who's talking. Cross pulled out a datapad. Also, there's paperwork. Approximately 7 different treaties and cultural exchange protocols that now apply to you. I'll need your signature on all of them. Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm having a weird day. Your weird day is going to last at least 60 days, possibly longer. Get used to it. Cross looked at Valkyrith. And you, was the blade bond really necessary? You've painted a permanent target on him. I have given him the tools and status to survive that target, Valkyrith responded. As blade-bonded partners, any warrior who wishes to challenge him must face both of us. And any who succeed in harming him answer to me personally. It is protection and partnership. It's also incredibly binding. You're stuck with each other now. Yes. Valkyrith looked at Roan and her expression softened slightly. I am aware. Cross muttered something about diplomatic incidents and retirement plans, then headed back to her office, presumably to start the mountain of paperwork that apparently came with accidentally becoming Kyrillith nobility. Roan and Valkyrith stood in the salvage yard as Ember's end sun set, painting everything in shades of amber and red. He still held the blade, its weight unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. So, he said eventually, blade-bonded partners. Mutual fate, consequences together, forever or until death releases us. Yes, that's pretty permanent. It is the most permanent bond in Kyrillith culture, more binding than marriage, more sacred than family ties. We are partners in all things now, combat, honor, consequence, and choice. She paused. I should have explained before offering, given you time to consider. But in that moment with Zarkin about to move against you, the blade bond was the only protection I could offer that tradition would force them to respect. So you protected me by binding yourself to me permanently. Yes. Roan looked at the blade, then at her. You spent 4 years tracking me down to honor a life debt. Now you've bound your entire future to mine to keep me safe. Either you're incredibly committed to honor, or I'm missing something. Valkyrith was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard before. 4 years ago, you saved my life when I had accepted death. You gave me a second chance I did not expect and had not earned. Since then, I have won battles, claimed victories, built a reputation that spans sectors. But I never forgot the moment someone chose to save me for no reason beyond basic human decency. That moment changed everything, made me question what strength truly means, what honor requires, what warriors exist to protect. She stepped closer, and in the fading light her eyes caught the sunset like molten gold. I came here to honor a debt, but I stayed because I met someone who saved 93 lives and considers it a random accident, who faces legendary warriors with a plasma cutter and sarcasm, who chose to stand beside me when isolation would have been safer. And I realized that the debt I owe is not just for saving my life 4 years ago. It is for reminding me why that life is worth living. Roan felt something warm and terrifying settle in his chest. That's not a life debt, that's something else entirely. Yes, Valkyrith agreed. It is, and I am finding I do not mind. They stood there as darkness fell and Ember's end's lights began to flicker on across the colony. Somewhere in the administrative building, Marshal Cross was probably drowning in paperwork and cursing his name. Somewhere in Kyrillith space, rival warriors were planning challenges that would arrive in exactly 60 days. Somewhere in the galaxy, politicians and intelligence agencies were recalculating everything, because a legendary warrior had blade bonded with an obscure human salvager. But standing there, holding a ceremonial blade he barely understood, beside a warrior who'd crossed the galaxy for honor and stayed for something more complicated, Roan realized his quiet life was officially over. And surprisingly, he was okay with that. So, he said eventually, 60 days before your rivals come back to test whether I'm worthy of this blade, any chance you can teach me to use it without accidentally stabbing myself? Valkyrith smiled, genuine and warm, and transforming her entire face from intimidating to almost approachable. I can teach you combat forms, strategic thinking, warrior protocols, and approximately 700 years of Kyrillith military tradition. That sounds impossible. It is, but we have 60 days and mutual stubbornness. I have survived on less. She gestured toward the workshop. Come, we begin tonight. If you are to stand as my blade-bonded partner, you must understand what that means. And I must teach you how to survive the consequences we have just claimed. They walked back into the workshop together, and Roan realized that somehow, accidentally, impossibly, his life had just acquired purpose again. Not the kind he'd expected, not quiet and safe and anonymous, but the kind that mattered. The kind that came from standing beside someone who valued honor enough to bind her fate to his. The kind that would probably get him killed, but at least it would be interesting. 60 days felt simultaneously too long and not nearly enough. Roan's salvage yard transformed into something between a workshop and a training ground. Valkyrith moved her ship to a more defensible position, installed security systems that made Marshal Cross's equipment look like children's toys, and began teaching Roan what it meant to be blade bonded to a legendary warrior. The training was brutal, not because Valkyrith was cruel, but because she was thorough. She taught him Kyrillith combat forms, not because he'd ever match her skill, but because understanding how warriors thought and moved gave him tactical advantages. She taught him their language, their customs, their codes of honor that governed everything from formal challenges to dinner etiquette. She taught him to read body language, assess threats, identify weapon configurations by sight. And between training sessions, they learned each other. Valkyrith, it turned out, had a dry sense of humor that emerged when she forgot to maintain perfect warrior composure. She laughed at Roan's jokes, not the polite acknowledgement of someone being diplomatic, but genuine amusement that transformed her face. She was brilliant with mechanical systems, approaching engineering problems with the same strategic precision she applied to combat. And she had opinions about everything, from human food, interesting but structurally unstable, to colonial architecture, defensively inadequate but aesthetically acceptable, to Roan's tendency to name his tools inefficient but endearing. Roan discovered that beneath the legendary warrior was someone who loved starlight, who sang Kyrillith battle hymns while cooking, who had spent 4 years searching not just to honor a debt, but because loneliness was universal across species. Someone who'd built a reputation on strength but privately valued kindness more. They developed routines, morning combat training that left Roan exhausted and Valkyrith satisfied. Afternoons working together in the shop, he'd repair salvage while she maintained her weapons, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. Evenings studying Kyrillith culture, or teaching her human customs, or simply sitting in comfortable silence watching embers end sunset. Marshal Cross visited weekly, alternating between delivering paperwork and checking whether they'd somehow started an interstellar incident. The answer was usually not yet, which she seemed to consider a victory. News spread across the sectors. The Crimson Blade's blade bond with a human salvager became a story people told, some with horror, some with fascination, some with hope. Young Kyrillith warriors started questioning whether strength required isolation, or if partnership was its own form of power. Human civilians saw a legendary warrior choosing to honor bonds with one of their own, and felt something shift in how they understood cross-species relations. There were complications. Human officials who thought Roan was a security risk. Kyrillith traditionalists who sent messages ranging from curious to threatening. Intelligence agencies who wanted to know what strategic advantage Valkyrith was pursuing. Media requests that Marshal Cross blocked with prejudice. But in the salvage yard, surrounded by broken equipment and impossible training regimens, Roan and Valkyrith built something neither had expected: a home. The 60th day arrived with clear skies and inevitable dread. They stood in the salvage yard at dawn, both aware that the rivals would come today. Valkyrith wore full ceremonial armor, her weapons displayed according to challenge protocols. Roan wore practical clothing and carried the blade she'd given him, still learning to move with it, still uncomfortable with its weight but committed to trying. "Are you ready?" Valkyrith asked. "Absolutely not, but I'm here anyway." "That is sufficient." She checked her equipment one final time. "When they arrive, they will test you first. Questions about tradition, combat scenarios, assessments of your understanding. Answer honestly. Do not attempt to impress them. They will see through deception immediately." "What if I fail?" "You will not fail. You have spent 60 days learning what many warriors take years to understand. You have earned the blade you carry." She looked at him with an expression that had moved far beyond duty or obligation into something warmer. "And you have me beside you. That counts for more than tradition gives credit for." The rival ships arrived exactly at noon, 3 vessels descending in formation, landing in the same positions they'd occupied 60 days prior. The boarding ramps extended, and out stepped Zarkin, Kelmira, and Torvin, looking exactly as intimidating as Roan remembered. They crossed the salvage yard with military precision, stopping at the formal distance challenge protocols required. Torvin stepped forward as speaker. "Roan Keller, 60 days have passed. We come to assess whether your blade bond with Valkyrith is genuine or merely political convenience. You will answer our questions. You will demonstrate your understanding. And we will judge whether you are worthy of the blade you carry and the partner you claim." "I'm ready," Roan said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "First question, recite the warrior's creed, in Kyrillith." Roan took a breath and spoke the words Valkyrith had taught him, pronunciation careful and deliberate. It wasn't perfect. His accent was obvious, his inflection sometimes wrong, but he got through all 7 verses without major mistakes. The rivals exchanged glances. Kelmira spoke next. "Second, a warrior discovers their blade-bonded partner has dishonored themselves through cowardice in combat. What is the required response?" This was a trick question. Valkyrith had warned him about questions designed to test whether he understood spirit versus letter of law. The required response under traditional law is to sever the bond and challenge the partner to restore honor through combat. But the true answer is that genuine blade bonds are formed between partners who understand each other's character. If I truly knew my partner, I would know cowardice is impossible for them. What appears as cowardice is likely strategy, injury, or circumstance I don't fully understand. The required response is investigation and trust, not immediate judgment. Zarkin made a sound that might have been approval. Third question, you face an enemy who offers you a choice, your life or your partner's honor. Which do you choose? Neither. I find a third option because blade-bonded partners don't accept false choices. We face consequences together or we create new possibilities. Roan met Zarkin's eyes. Besides, if I traded my life for Valkyrith's honor, she'd probably resurrect me just to kill me again for dishonoring the partnership. So survival seems like the smarter tactical choice. Valkyrith made a sound suspiciously like suppressed laughter. Torvin stepped forward. Final assessment, combat demonstration. You will face Kelmira in a non-lethal challenge. Demonstrate that you can defend yourself adequately and understand tactical principles Valkyrith has taught you. Kelmira drew her blade, elegant, deadly, held with the casual confidence of someone who'd mastered violence as an art form. Roan drew his own blade, feeling its unfamiliar weight, remembering 60 days of training that felt simultaneously extensive and completely inadequate. They circled each other. Kelmira moved first, fast, testing his reflexes. Roan blocked barely, using the defensive form Valkyrith had drilled into him until it was instinct. Kelmira pressed harder, her strikes precise and controlled, forcing him back. He wasn't going to win this. That was obvious to everyone watching. But Valkyrith hadn't taught him to win. She'd taught him to survive, to read his opponent, to find opportunities in chaos. Kelmira committed to a strike pattern, following traditional forms. Roan recognized it, had studied it 3 weeks ago, and instead of blocking, he moved sideways, using her momentum against her, creating distance. It wouldn't work against a warrior trying to kill him. But in a formal assessment, creating opportunity was enough. They circled again. Kelmira smiled, genuine, appreciative. Better, again. The challenge continued for maybe 5 minutes. Roan was exhausted, bruised, completely outmatched. But he stayed on his feet, used what he'd learned, and created enough opportunities that Kelmira had to actually think about her approach instead of simply overwhelming him. Finally, Torvin called a halt. Kelmira stepped back, her blade lowering. Assessment complete. The three rivals conferred in Kyrillith. Rapid conversation Roan could only partially follow. Then Torvin turned to address both Roan and Valkyrith. Roan Keller. 60 days ago, you accepted Valkyrith's blade without understanding the full obligation such acceptance demands. Today, you have demonstrated adequate knowledge of our traditions, genuine understanding of partnership principles, and sufficient combat competence to survive challenges you will inevitably face. The blade bond is judged genuine and worthy of recognition. Zarkin stepped forward. You are still human, still weak by our standards, still lacking decades of training our warriors receive from birth. But you have earned the blade you carry and the partner who stands beside you. We acknowledge the bond. Kelmira smiled. And Roan Keller, thank you for the challenge. It has been many years since I faced an opponent who used creativity over strength. You will never match a warrior's skill, but you may survive on cleverness. That is its own kind of strength. They returned to their ships. Engines powered up, and then they were gone, ascending through atmosphere, leaving Roan standing in his salvage yard holding a blade he'd just barely proven worthy of carrying. Marshal Cross appeared, datapad in hand. Congratulations. You passed. The blade bond is now formally recognized by Kyrillith warrior caste, which means approximately 16 different diplomatic protocols just activated, and I have more paperwork. She smiled despite the complaint, but also means you're officially safe from immediate challenges. They can't move against you without violating the bond they just acknowledged. So we're good. You're recognized. Whether you're good depends on what you do next. Cross looked between him and Valkyrith. You've got standing in Kyrillith society now, political weight, the ability to influence cross-species relations just by existing. That's either an opportunity or a disaster waiting to happen. Valkyrith spoke quietly, or perhaps simply a chance to demonstrate that strength comes in many forms, and partnerships transcend species when both parties value honor. Let's hope the galaxy agrees with you. Cross headed back to her office, muttering about treaties and cultural exchange protocols. Roan looked at Valkyrith, who stood in her ceremonial armor looking simultaneously fierce and somehow softer than when they'd first met. So we did it, survived the assessment, the bond is recognized. Yes, and now we continue, build on what we have created, face whatever consequences come next. She moved closer, and her expression was warm with something that had moved far beyond duty into genuine affection. Together, as partners, as we have been for 60 days and will be for however many days we are granted. Roan felt that same warm, terrifying certainty he'd felt when he first accepted her blade. I'm still not sure why you chose me. Out of everyone in the galaxy, why track down a salvager who saved your life by accident? Because you saved my life by accident and considered it unremarkable. Because you faced legendary warriors with sarcasm and a plasma cutter. Because you spent 60 days learning traditions that are not yours to honor a bond you did not seek. Because when given every opportunity to choose safety over partnership, you chose me. She smiled. And because somewhere in those 60 days, the life debt became irrelevant. I stayed not from obligation, but because I found something I had not expected to find, belonging. Yeah, Roan admitted. Me too. They stood in the salvage yard as Ember's end sun climbed higher, and Roan realized his life had irrevocably changed. No more isolation. No more quiet anonymity. He was blade bonded to the galaxy's most famous warrior, recognized by Kyrillith law, and probably going to spend the rest of his life navigating complications he barely understood. But looking at Valkyrith, at the partner who'd spent 4 years finding him and 60 days teaching him what honor meant, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "Come on," he said. "I've got a plasma regulator that's been mocking me for 3 weeks. Want to help me fix it? You wish me to assist with salvage repair. I wish my blade-bonded partner to help me with the work that pays for this operation. Also, you're better at mechanical systems than you admit." Valkyrith laughed, that genuine, transforming sound, and followed him into the workshop. And in the comfortable chaos of broken equipment and shared purpose, they continued building what they'd started 60 days ago. A home forged not by tradition or obligation, but by mutual choice, respect, and the revolutionary act of refusing to face the universe alone. The salvage yard hummed with activity. 2 people who shouldn't have worked, a legendary warrior and an obscure salvager, somehow creating something that did. And if sometimes challenges arose, if rivals questioned or officials complicated or the galaxy watched with judgment, well, they faced it together. Blade-bonded, partners, together until death or honor released them, which, given how they'd started, sounded exactly right.